This is a tutorial on the seller counteroffer and the seller multiple counteroffer. We will start first with the seller counteroffer, and then we'll jump over and show the difference in the multiple counteroffer as the forms are very similar. So it starts here with the date this form is drafted, and you'll write that up here on the top right. Then you'll check the box purchase agreement because the first counteroffer will be countering a purchase agreement. Now, of course, if it's the second counteroffer, it's implied that the buyer has already countered once and the seller is countering a second time. In that case, you'd check the box here that this is a seller counteroffer number 2, countering the buyer's counteroffer number 1. But in this scenario, this is simply assuming the seller has received an offer and is countering it for the first time. Then you'll put the date of the form that you're countering. So that's the date of the purchase agreement, and that date can be found in the top left corner of page 1 of the purchase agreement. It's not the date that the buyer signed and dated. Sometimes people mix that up. It's the date in the top left corner of page 1 of 10 on the RPA. Then you'll put the property address here, the name of the buyer, the name of the seller. And here in paragraph 1C, this is where we get down to the terms or provisions that you're going to enter. And I like to itemize numerically. So I put a line item and then I go 1, 2, 3, 4 for each item just to make it clear of each individual term that we're addressing. So for example, you would look at this as paragraph 1C1, and then you'd write in sales price to be or purchase price to be blank. Of course, all other terms in the purchase contract carry over. There's no need to duplicate a term or provision that you see in a preceding purchase agreement or counteroffer. And sometimes I see that with agents that are doing multiple counters back and forth. They might see some sort of provision or term in a prior counteroffer that they like and they want to keep. And then on the next counter, they include the provision they want to keep and they say it a second time. Remember, a counter is just an amendment to the form that corresponds to. All you're doing is changing a particular term. Everything else stays the same and carries over. So you're only putting the terms that need to be changed. You have all the space here to put line items of the terms that you want to counter. If it's not enough room, you can always check this box and add an addendum. And there's more space on the addendum. If you need to add maybe an exhibit or another form, for example, let's say the seller decides they want to add a contingency for a replacement property. You could check a box here and write in the contingency form for a seller's replacement property. By default, this form expires on the 3rd day from when it was signed, and you can shorten that time period. If you want to put pressure on the buyer to make their decision, you can check this box and put a time of day. I know it says 5 up here. I like to put the evening actually because I'm assuming that people will get home around 5 or 6 and may want to discuss and come to a final decision in the evening, like 9 or 10 p.m. even. But that's personal preference. And then you can write the date. You could put the following day if you want to just give the buyer 24 hours to decide. And you can put that the offer is received by the seller, or you could write your name, who is authorized to receive it. And then when we jump down here, this is where the seller is going to sign and date, and then this is where the buyer will accept. Now, if the buyer is going to counter again, they still need to sign this form, but they check this box here, meaning that it's another step in the process. Because technically a seller should check the box. The seller should, if they're countering a purchase contract, they should sign the purchase contract and check the box that it's subject to this counteroffer. And then in turn, the buyer is going to sign here and check this box if there's another counteroffer. All those documents ultimately need to be signed. I know agents typically cut corners and they don't do that, but that's the proper form. So once the buyer signs this and sends this back, assuming there is no other counter and the buyer's not checking that box here, if the buyer signs this and sends this back to the listing agent, this is a binding agreement. Now, there is a confirmation of acceptance. This is not a binding portion of the document. This simply is an acknowledgement. This shows that this is just good measure to show that the other parties received a copy, a fully executed copy, meaning signed by both parties, and it's initialed here. Sometimes agents don't even do this because in a way it's a formality, as it's not a binding component of the form. Now let's jump over to the multiple counteroffer and look at the difference. So here we have the multiple counter that starts out just like the last counteroffer with the date and the address and everything, and then the section here with where you can put line items. Again, I like to itemize numerically. And then we jump down here. Now here's where it gets different. So there's text that states that this is going to be this counteroffer can be delivered to multiple buyers, and consider that this counteroffer can change depending on the buyer. A seller or listing agent does not have to create one uniform counter and send that same identical counteroffer to multiple buyers. The listing agent can create their own customized or personalized counteroffer to each buyer depending on that buyer's unique offer. So all those counters can be different. And then this counteroffer can then be sent to all those buyers. Let's assume, for example, that there are 3 buyers. So the seller can create 3 of these SMCOs, seller multiple counteroffers, and the seller will sign each one, and then they'll send it to the buyer. Now the buyer can sign here and return it back to the seller or the listing agent, and it's not binding like the counteroffer. The counteroffer, once it's signed by the buyer and delivered back to the seller or authorized party, which is the listing agent, that's a binding document. Those 2 parties are now under contract. The difference with this form is that when both parties sign, it's still not executed until the seller signs a second time, creating a total of 3 signatures. And that's what this box 8 here is. It's saying that there are multiple counters out, and maybe all 3 buyers that receive this multiple counter are going to get a copy of this form, and all 3 buyers are going to sign it and return it. Well, the seller is obviously not obligated to perform a transaction with all 3 buyers, so the seller then can choose and sign off on the counteroffer and from the buyer that they prefer to work with. So that's why it requires the second section to be signed by the seller. And then of course there's an initial area here. That's when this is signed by the seller second time and delivered to the buyer. The buyer is going to initial here, acknowledging receipt that they have an executed document. It's a formality and it's good measure, but it's not necessary to make this binding. So that's the big difference, is this box number 8 and the fact that it requires 3 signatures total, 2 from the seller, as opposed to the normal seller counter that just requires the buyer to sign it and deliver it back to the seller. I hope you found this helpful. Feel welcome to visit our website, openhometeam.com, or email info@openhometeam.com. Thank you.